Good morning. My name is Murat Kilic. I'm a DJ, a venue owner, an entertainment booker, and a father. I've lived in Sydney most of my life, and for most of my adult life I've been involved in electronic music. 10 years ago, the sky really was pink in Sydney. Everything was perfect. King's Cross, the entertainment precinct, was thriving. It was chaotic, it was busy, and it added colour and life to the city. Sydney already has extraordinary natural beauty, so when you add a thriving nightlife, it was easily one of the best cities in the world. When Juan Antonio Samaranch sang out the famous words, "The winner is Sydney," about the 2000 Olympics for the first time in my life, I felt a real strong sense of identity, and I was proud to be from Sydney. Now, I'm actually embarrassed. Sydney had one of the most exuberant nightlifes in the world. It seethed with energy. The nighttime culture was effervescent, sun-infused, and excitingly awake. It better mirrored our personality, and indeed, much of the success and charisma of the Sydney Olympics was driven by that same spirit. After that, we blossomed for over a decade. In 2012, Thomas Kelly, who was 18, was killed in King's Cross after being hit by one punch at 9 p.m. About 6 months later, another 18-year-old, Daniel Christie, who was out celebrating New Year's Eve, was also punched randomly and also died. The result of these two attacks brought unprecedented media attention. Everyone was in agreement that something needed to be done. So the government took direct aim at late trading venues. That was despite the attacks taking place outside venues and taking place at 9 p.m. What the government did was drew an invisible line. You can see it there, where the pink area is. So any venues within that pink area were under these new lockout laws, which meant no entry or re-entry after 1:30 a.m. and also no booze service after 3 a.m. There was a whole raft of other changes. I don't know if you can read them, but there's a hell of a lot. No shots after midnight, no more than 4 drinks per person after midnight, no more than 2 drinks per person after 2. I can keep going, but it's a bit boring, to be honest. What did we have to do? We had to survive. We had to adapt, or we died, basically. That was it. And everyone had to adapt. And there were casualties. I was a casualty. But before that, we had a perfect situation. In 2011, 3 months after having our first child, my partner and I, we opened the Spice Cellar. It became the standard for electronic music in Sydney and was recognised and nominated for an industry award for being the best club in Australia. The electronic music was thriving. The electronic music scene was thriving. On any given night, you could see world-class artists in Sydney. You could see Guy Gerber on a Wednesday, Kyle Craig on a Thursday, and Adam Bayer on a Saturday. DJs had heaps of work, and bookers had lots of budget. It was actually a really good period. I could personally move from one venue to another to see 3 or 4 artists play in one night, which is a key part of my role as a booker, discovering talent. Now, I can only choose one venue to be in by 1:30, and that's where I have to stay. My freedom is compromised. After the laws were introduced, I remember standing at 3 a.m. in my venue, looking at the dance floor, which was once heaving, and I was literally broken-hearted. I looked at my venue, and it was over. Watching something you have built with love and passion get destroyed overnight, like a house of cards, it really hurts. We have to resuscitate our scene. It's in a state of flux. The casualties of the lockout laws were widespread and significant. I wasn't the only one. The foot traffic in King's Cross went down a whopping 85%. Close to 20 clubs have closed. Thousands of jobs have been lost. Not just electronic music, but live music venues as well. I had to lay off all of my staff. I had 20 staff. I now have myself and my partner. We're a two-man show. One of my friends who had to quit music recently completely because he couldn't survive anymore. He actually went back and got a full-time job in a retail store. He's released an album and is one of the most talented producers I know. We also have cultural refugees, people who are talented who can't find work in Sydney anymore. They're moving elsewhere. There's a brain drain that's going on, and they're moving to other places like Melbourne and Berlin. But it's not just economics. The human cost was also huge. Another person who used to work for me I know had to be saved from throwing himself in front of a train out of desperation. The suffering is real. I lament for all the kids who will miss out on watching great artists perform. I got to experience as a teenager watching the likes of Sven Väth and John Digweed in the 90s. I remember in 1989 at Dome nightclub hearing Blue Monday for the first time on the dance floor, and it changed my world. The experience left something indelible in me, and actually, I attribute my transition from my first career in investment banking to electronic music as a direct result of that dance floor inspiration. Apart from the numbers, there are flow-on effects, things that are not quantifiable. The future for our industry, our culture, and our children. Our need for the night is by no means new. Primitive man had the campfire where the tribe came together, they shared stories, they laughed, and they ate. More than that, though, it was a place where creative outfits were donned, makeup was worn, and people danced wildly to the deep beats of the community drum. The nighttime has always been a place of mysticism and bacchanal, a sacred place to set your raw soul free. Sir Isaac Newton once said, "Every body continues in its state of rest unless it is compelled to change that state by forces impressed upon it." What Newton said about physics is also true for human nature, the concept of disrupting or being disrupted. We don't really like change, but often change is necessary for evolution. Sometimes change comes from within us, and sometimes it comes from an external force. In my case, although we had to eventually close our beloved club in its heyday, I didn't lose everything. After the lockout laws destroyed the business model of our nightclub, the Spice Cellar, we transformed the venue into a Mexican bar restaurant. But as much as I love tequila and tacos, I'm still passionate about electronic music. Sydney's nightlife was forced to change by the government. It's in a state of flux right now. Our community, our identity, our livelihood is all threatened. We have to save Sydney's soul. The soul apparently glows and is the most beautiful thing that anyone can ever see. If you remember the scene in Pulp Fiction where Vincent and Jules, they open the briefcase and they're looking at Marcellus Wallace's soul and it's glowing. That's what Sydney had. It had a beautiful glowing soul, and now it's gone. And it's our job to win it back. Things can't get much worse, so things can only get better. It has taken some time to rally support, but finally there's some momentum. There's some activist movements out there helping the cause. Keep Sydney Open is the main one. It's been pushing the agenda to lift lockout laws and has garnered quite a bit of support. There's also another movement called Reclaim the Streets. And recently there's been some talk about exempting some live music venues from the lockout laws. Just today, in fact, the Sydney Morning Herald quoted, "The lockout is a part of the fabric of a night out in Sydney now, but that doesn't mean we should alter it to help live music survive." So there is hope. However, earlier in 2015, our current Premier, rather than sending a lifeline out to our industry, announced that lockout laws didn't apply to venues that had casinos and poker machines. So if you want to grab a beer and have a dance, you're locked out. But if you want to gamble, no problem. The reason is the gambling industry is a powerful lobby group. It makes large political donations to parties on all sides of the political fence. Keep your friends close or just buy them. Australians spend more per head on gambling than any other country in the world. It's a cancer in our society, and the New South Wales government encourages further growth in what it knows is a harmful industry. The actions of our government currently make me physically ill. They prey on the most vulnerable in society, on the aged and the poor. They trade culture for profit. So it seems that Sydney is not that different to Marcellus Wallace after all, who sold his soul to the devil. The engineer of the lockout laws, Barry O'Farrell, the politician who was the Premier at the time, actually had to resign under dubious circumstances 2 months after introducing the lockout laws. When asked about receiving a phone call and a $3,000 bottle of wine from a party contributor, in his own words, he had a massive memory fail and he became known as Barry O'Fail. This was the note that he actually wrote thanking the person who gave him the bottle of wine, which he forgot about. Meanwhile, whilst he was sipping on $500 glasses of red, we were on the ground suffering. The aftermath of the lockout laws saw a shift from night to day. Everyone was forced to adapt, and Sydney gained some daytime events. As Mark just mentioned, unfortunately, a few weeks ago, 2 lives were lost at a day festival. In the newspaper just last week, a popular newspaper, this image is what was published. Open prejudice perpetuating something that's disenfranchising our industry, separatist media, pushing an ignorant view of what we do. Our government, with much assistance from the mainstream media, have typecast electronic music as the Grim Reaper dealing death to kids. What do you think my mum thinks when she reads this in the newspaper? She knows I'm a DJ. Or what about my daughter when she grows up? Oh, Dad, are you involved in killing children? On one of the many occasions the police came to our venue, we were told that we were not responsible enough to be out past 3 a.m. They filed a written report, and I quote, "Any person entering a club past 3 a.m. must be high on drugs or intoxicated because they dance erratically with their hands in the air." The remedy for Sydney and other developing markets, in my opinion, is we have to change this perception. There's a really negative perception out there of what we do, a lack of understanding. Popular media and everyday people don't know what we do. We have to work collectively to influence government for the good of the industry. We have to establish lobby groups, and maybe just like the gambling lobby, we can get our way too. We need to create infrastructure like industry bodies and industry research to protect our industry and our livelihood. We have to be precautionary, not reactionary. We have to speak the language of politics. They don't know the difference between Dixon and Richie Horton or Panorama Bar and DC-10. All they care about is how much it costs, how much money does it bring in, how many jobs it creates, and most importantly, how many votes they can get. The San Francisco City did an economic report recently where they showed the nighttime industries bring in $4.5 billion in revenue and creates 48,000 jobs. We have to justify our worth similarly. It's not just our dollar value, but it's also the qualitative stuff. It's the intangible magic that we can't count, but that we all feel. That feeling of enlightenment, of freedom, that feeling when you hear a track on the dance floor, and the feeling is so genuine and true, you feel that everyone is connected. It's tribal, it's instinctual, and it's what makes us human. Thank you.